This is home. I want to tell you a little bit about my story, and then I'll talk about the NAR stuff, which is what I think you guys want me to talk about. But for the people that don't know me, hello.
Yeah, that's better.
So I have a very DC story. My dad worked for a government contractor that did health development stuff in Latin America. I spent 0 to 12 as an embassy kid representing us in other countries. 6 South American countries, did kidnapping drills and all that fun stuff that comes with being associated with DC. Moved back to this area at 12 years old, Thoreau Middle School, Madison High School, George Mason University. So I'm as a local boy as you can get. My freshman year of college was the year 2000, and I was being recruited in high school to do websites at WorldCom and AOL and all these fly-high companies, if anybody remembers that time. I went to George Mason to do graphic design. I was going to go into tech. And my freshman year of college, the tech bubble blew up. We remember that? So that was my first experience with your cheese being moved. I went to college to get this degree because back then you needed college degrees, and they said, if you get this degree, we're gonna give you like 150 grand, which is the equivalent of like 400 grand today. And my freshman year, that disappeared, like all went away. Right? WorldCom went under, stocks imploded. My sophomore year of college, I took an entrepreneurship class because I said if I can't get a job, I might as well start a company doing web design. And I did this website class, and it turns out I'd have to raise $400,000 to buy servers, which is like a crazy concept now with AWS. And it would take about 3 years to break even. And I was at my friend's parents' house for dinner in Vienna. And his mom gave me this book. She goes, I want you to read this book. If you want to be a business owner, this is a good book. It was Robert Kiyosaki's Rich Dad Poor Dad. And Robert Kiyosaki's Rich Dad Poor Dad. And it fundamentally changed my view of the world and my reality. Both my parents have PhDs. My dad worked for the same organization for 20 and a half years. And I'd never heard of leverage of people, time, or money. And I got obsessed with real estate and reading about it and anything I could get my hands on. My dad took a personal development course, and a guy used a script that you should all write down if this is not part of your vocabulary, which is, would you like to invest in real estate passively? And it's just a very soft open to get you to coffee and find out if you want to buy some rental properties. My dad said, no, but my kid is obsessed. Would you have coffee with him? So he says yes. I come prepared, and I said, I'm willing to work for free. I just want you to teach me stuff. And he said, I don't have time for snot-nosed kids. But if you're serious, call this stranger in Colorado. His name's Claude Diamond, and he can teach you everything that he taught me. So I call the stranger, probably the best salesperson I've ever met in my life. He goes, Leo, I can teach you everything that you want to know. It's only going to cost you $10,000. This is 2001. So I did what every rational 19-year-old does, and I sold all my worldly possessions and wired a stranger all my money. I didn't tell my mom, I didn't tell my dad, I didn't tell my roommates. I had bought a car, waiting tables at the Outback that used to be right down the street. And I signed the contract, and on the third page there was a clause that said, wax on, wax off. If it's legal and ethical, you will do what I tell you or I keep your money, and that's the end of the relationship. And so I wanted to be an investor, and what he had me do was learn about psychology. How human beings make decisions. We all make emotional decisions and justify them logically, right? And so I would run ads in the Washington Post once upon a time that said I had a 3-bedroom, 2-bath, rent to own for $1,600. And I didn't. He just wanted me to practice talking to strangers, control the conversation, realizing if they're ready, willing, and able, right? A lot of you probably still spend time talking to people who are just curious. And that's okay, but you shouldn't do that during your prospecting time. And so it was really intense education on how human beings make decisions. The LP Mama, if you're on the phone with the prospect, make sure you understand their timeline. Are they qualified? Are they working with another agent before you waste your time? And about month 8, he said, you got to get your real estate license. I said, I have zero interest in that. He referred me to page 3. I get my license. I call the guy who blew me off because he had just bought the Keller Williams Reston franchise. And he said, I'm going to sponsor you. I'm going to take care of you. I thought I was special. I didn't realize I just had a heartbeat and a license. So I joined him, and it was probably like my third week there. Me and my landlord had a little disagreement on volume, and he informed me that I needed to find a new place to live with my roommates. So I'm on the MLS looking for rentals, and he comes by, looks over my shoulder, goes, why are you renting? I was like, well, because I'm a child. And he said, go down the hall and talk to the loan officer. And the loan officer pulls my credit. She goes, you have really good credit for a kid. You paid off a car? I was like, long story. and she says, you qualify for FHA. You got to convince your parents to co-sign you as a non-occupant co-borrower, and you can still buy with 3.5% down. So I go home, and I have a little script, and I pitch my dad, and he laughs and goes, get the hell out of here. So I asked my mom in Spanish, and she said, claro, mijo, go talk to your dad. And so my dad lent me 3% for 8 hours. I got the seller to pay all my concessions, and I got a certified check from him in the morning. I went to the settlement, I got my commission, and paid my dad back. I bought a 4-bedroom, rented out 3 bedrooms for $500 a piece, and had no mortgage payment. That was going into the summer. I wrote my little script with my one transaction, and I called all my fraternity brothers in, and I said, let me talk to your parents about your housing needs for next year. Once I got them on the phone, I said, for the same money for tuition for next year, we can buy your child a house, have no payments for the next 3 years, and when you sell it, you'll make some money. I sold 11 homes that summer, made $60,000, and went out and bought a BMW because that's what a 21-year-old does. But the reason I'm telling you that story is because some of you in this room actually knew me back then. Raise your hand if I was your broker at some point. I looked 14. I grew this facial hair back then because everyone kept asking me if I was lost in the office. I was like, no, I'm the goddamn broker. And the reason that's important is because at every point in your life, the little voice inside your head is talking lots of shit. And it's mean as hell, right? You're too old, you're too young, you're too fat, you're too short. And mostly it was probably some loved one who put that all in your head. And we let that dictate so much of our personality and our decision-making process. And I'm grateful that I got to understand that everyone has that voice. And that became a superpower for me once I realized that everyone lives in fear. And if you can just turn it off and realize that whatever moment you're standing in is actually your advantage. So when I was 21 and had no team and was competing with Bob Andrews, if everybody remembers that.
Yes.
By the way, Bob lives in Sarasota. He sold my aunt 2 homes. I talk to Bob all the time. He's at EXP. But I would say I have nothing to do. I will sit at your house Monday through Sunday and hold it open, right? I will pick up my phone. You won't get passed along to a buyer's agent or listing agent on the team, which again, once I became the biggest team in the country, my script was, how can you compete with one person who doesn't have a team? So my point is, whatever you do, know, and have is a superpower. And one of the things that I learned early on is if you have an authentic conversation with yourself and learn how it is that you're wired, life's way more fun, right? Education in the world, I think, is screwed up because we learn to lean into the stuff that we don't do well. Right? We get a bad grade, we gotta look. When I grow up, I can just pay people to do the stuff I don't want to do. Right? So figure out how you're wired. And the way I suggest it is very academic. Take a DISC profile, AVA, Myers-Briggs, I don't care which one. Figure out how God wired you.
I need the owner of 2 white Teslas to go out front, please. They're going to tow your vehicle.
Did you not hear my announcement before? Now we have 2 Teslas.
Yeah, 2 Teslas. Valet number 773 and 790.
Okay, now we're gonna see you. Now we have you. Okay, because you do need to do that, or it will be towed at your expense. Okay, good.
I was like, that is the most violent interruption. I was like, did I say something offensive? I've never been cut off like that. I thought she was gonna confess. So where I was going with that was once you figure out what strengths you have, what I've learned is once, you can double down on it. Because I tell people, there's lots of stuff I'm not good at, a whole lot. But there's a couple of things that I've become one of the best in the world at what I do because I've practiced it and invested in it and kind of doubled down on it. But if you don't start with actually having an honest conversation with yourself about how you're wired, you could spend a lot of time doing stuff that you're not wired to do. And everybody know what the DISC assessment is? Yes. I pick on that one because that one's pretty well known. But I actually don't think that you can't do the stuff you're not wired to do. I can do a lot of things I'm not wired to do. I just don't have energy at the end of the day if I do it. And I'm not talking like crystals and essential oils energy. I'm talking about like, when I get off stage today, I will be more energized than before I got on stage because I like this. By the way, I don't have a script. Clearly I wasn't ready. But I'm super comfortable doing this. For some of you, this is like the scenario I'm in right now would probably give you anxiety, right? But if you realize how you're wired, you can either choose to do a business like that, right? Because that's the cool thing about this is I've traveled the whole country for 2 decades, and I've met people who make a phenomenal living, $500,000 plus, with such unique businesses inside of their gifts, right? Because I think one of the biggest fallacies that happens in the industry is you go to a seminar and you hear somebody say about how they're selling 300 homes in a way, and you go try that for a year and realize that it wasn't for you, right? So it first starts with understanding how you're wired and what brings you joy. Because the cool part is if you actually build a business around that, when you get home, you're actually cool to be around and a pleasure to be around. Last Friday, I had 6 hours of consolidated financials because we're doing earnings next week. Like, I don't plan date night or stuff to do with my kids because I'm not going to show up the way I want to show up, right? Because I'm out of energy, and that's how we snap, and that's how we take it out on people. So, really, really important life lesson I want to share there. But I sell $60,000. My senior year of college, I did $306,000 in GCI as a full-time student and a frat boy. I thought I was God's gift to real estate. I think I was the youngest principal broker inside the Keller Williams system at 21. I left, I went independent, if you guys remember that. In 2006, I spent all my money starting an independent. I emptied out 6 Keller Williams offices. A couple of you, I think, wanted me shot. Raise your hand. But the music stopped in the summer of '06. I remember specifically the listing that I had just sold in that neighborhood. He was actually my college professor who signed my diploma. I gave him a really good deal. And the next listing I took in the neighborhood sat for like 30 days at the same price. And I was like, this isn't good. 6 months later, my accountant had told me that summer I was worth $5 million. I had 14 rental properties. 6 months later, I was worth negative $1 million. And all my tenants stopped paying me. So, other big lesson I want to share with people is like, don't wait. That thing you're waiting for to donate time or money or spend time with your kids or your spouse, anything you want, like life moves in an instant and you don't want to regret anything. I gave it all back. BMWs went back. The rental, I got good at short sales because I negotiated a couple for myself. I remember, and then KW sued me for $1 million, which I didn't have. And we agreed that I would come back and be a good boy for 3 years and not be able to tell the story from stage for those 3 years. I go back to the office and they fly in my coffee to clean up the mess Leo created. That's how my coffee ended up in Virginia. But Mike was a true gentleman, asked me, look, I want to be your partner. I don't want you to feel like this is a 3-year prison sentence. How can I help you? And I said, I want to meet the top 10 KW agents in the world. And he called them all and used his name, and 6 of them said, come visit me. I had about 90 days of cash left. And I said, well, if I'm going to go out, I'm going to learn some shit on the way out. So I went and visited all these people, and I realized that none of them were any smarter than me. Most of them were hot messes, but they were really, really good at a couple things, and they had a niche. So I get back home, the world's melting. I I saw an ad that Wells Fargo needed agents to do BPOs. They gave me 8 of them. They gave me $50 a piece. I called them back. I said, give me as many as you can give me. I did 100 of them in 30 days. And I was doing that just to eat. And they said, would you like some listings? I said, yeah, I'll take some of those too. They gave me 7 listings. That year I did 99 transactions by myself. The second year I did 268. Then within that 3rd year of my prison sentence, I did 603 transactions. I was the #1 Keller Williams agent on the planet in transaction size. And that's, I think, where I really shifted from an agent to a business owner. And the one thing I want you to get away here from that is I've never been ready for whatever I'm about to say yes. I wasn't ready to sell someone a house at 19. I wasn't ready at 21 to broker an office of 200 agents. I wasn't ready to go independent. I wasn't ready to get sued. I wasn't ready to do REO because actually I had no REO experience, right? During REO, do you guys remember when IndyMac was taken back by the FDIC? That Friday I had 58 listings. That Monday they called me and said you have 0 listings. And I'd already done all the photos and repair work and everything. So I called the FDIC and I was like, hey, can I get these listings back? And the guy laughed and he said, absolutely not, you're not qualified. I said, but can I apply? And he said, yeah, there's an RFP process. I didn't know what RFP was, I had to Google it. And it was due the next day in Florida. So I printed it out. I did my best to fill it out. I may have exaggerated a couple things. I got on a plane and showed up to Miami where it was due. And I walked it in, and I asked for, the guy's name was Steve Murray. Not the same Steve Murray, we all know, different Steve Murray. And I said, hey, I'm here to give you this application. And he looked confused. He's like, what are you doing here? You don't know how to use the mail? I was like, it was important. I knew it was due the next day. I wasn't sure I was gonna get here on time. So he walks me into his conference room. He opens it up, takes out a pen and starts writing in it. He goes, I'm going to lunch. This shit's horrible, but you can use my conference room. Feel free to fix it. I was like, I can go to the hotel. He's like, no, just handwrite it. He comes back, he flips through it. He goes, congratulations, you now represent DC, Maryland, Virginia for the federal government. And I said, at the risk of sticking my foot in my mouth, why? And he said, because you showed up. And then I said, are you guys moving? Because there's like boxes everywhere. He goes, those are your competitors applying for this one position in the market that you're in. So, show up. 80 to 90% of my life is just showing up and then saying yes when someone offers me an opportunity that I'm not prepared for. The non-compete ends, I stay at KW. Do you guys remember I started the NAR chapter DC? 2012. It was like 28. The world was melting. Gary got invited to a couple meetings in DC, and he couldn't go. And he's like, hey, can you get there? Because it's tomorrow morning. I was like, sure. I show up, it's the White House. It's like, am I supposed to be here, Gary? So I'm in the room when CFPB, Dodd-Frank, and QRM were invented. Wow. With the head of FHA and FHFA and Dodd-Frank. They were all in the room. And I was terrified. And I told Gary I was just going to take notes. Halfway through the meeting, the head of FHFA, he goes, and what do the Hispanics think? I became the ombudsman for my people. But what I got out of being in that room is I understood that they were about to move the cheese on lending. Remember, we could borrow money from banks to flip houses back then. The ability to repay was going to stop that. So I got the idea to start Washington Capital Partners with Danny in 2012. That's now one of the largest hard money lenders in the country. But I said yes when it was super uncomfortable, right? And when we were building WCP, we needed public record data. And I called CoreLogic and Black Knight. They quoted me $300,000 for 8 counties of data. So we were Googling stuff, and it turned out that Zillow was debuting a public record API at a hackathon. I didn't know what a hackathon was because I'm not in software. And they said if we showed up, spent the weekend with them coding, they would give me an API to all the data I wanted. So we sent a team to San Francisco, and my goal was to hit download and roll out. but they set up the API in a read-only format, so we had to build something. And we built something that became Remine. We won the whole thing out of 200 teams, and there was teams from Google and Uber, not because we know a damn thing about software, is we actually knew something about real estate. So, again, born completely by accident. And the judges were Alex Perillo, the former CEO of Realogy, Bob Hale of HAR, and Earl Samuelson of Zillow. I got the API. We got invited back 3 months later to pitch in front of MLSs. I got my first contract before our MVP was built. I ended up raising $48 million, traveling all over the country, and Remine became an 80% market share of every realtor in North America. Hardest, dumbest thing I've ever done. Probably the most taxing thing on my mind, body, and soul because of the travel. But again, I was completely outside of my comfort zone, right? I walked in and raised money from some of the smartest VCs in the world who are all Stanford and Harvard educated. It's funny, every VC shop, there was one that looked like Batman and one that looked like Robin. One talked and the other one did the numbers. But I got to sit in front of them and they said, you are actually a domain expert, just like you guys. We understand who we serve. Sold both those companies, moved to South Florida. I was mostly spearfishing when I got a cold call from an area code that a mutual friend told me to pick up. It was Glenn Sanford. And he said, hey, I heard you're kind of smart. Do you want to be my chief technology officer? And I actually said, no, thank you. I don't like software. I'm good. He called me back a week later and he said, I wasn't expecting you to say no. Come hang out with me for a day in Arizona. So I flew out to Arizona. Turned out that I really like him as a human being. We get along. And by the way, he's a better salesperson than most of you give him credit for. He said, what are you going to do next? I said, I'll probably start another company. I've never had a job, by the way. This is my first job. And he said, just come hang out with me for like 6 months. If you don't have the idea, I have big company problems and I think you can help me, and then you can go. And I can either buy the company and we can partner, or I'll invest in your next Series A. So he made me an offer I couldn't refuse. So I joined as the president of affiliate services, and I optimized the portfolio. And then 6 months later, he called me. He said, hey, I was with this group and they said you're helping with this. I said, uh-huh. He said, you're helping with that, uh-huh. So he said, so I was on a website last night and read about a chief strategy officer title. So that's your new title. You kind of do it all now. And then 3 weeks ago on Sunday, he called me. He's like, so you're the CEO now? Okay, so, but again, my entire journey is like a whole bunch of trying a bunch of shit I'm really uncomfortable with and figuring it out. And you've all been there. And the most visceral example I can always think of is my first child. Right, when they hand it to you at the hospital, they're like, all right, off you go. Like, am I supposed to keep this thing alive? Like, is a responsible adult coming with us? Like, who's going to help us here? So the reason I say that is because we're about to enter probably the scariest moment of all of our professional careers in residential real estate. And I've traveled the whole country, and there's two camps. One is anger and paralyzing fear, and then the folks who are like putting on the war paint and saying, let's do this. But what I will tell everybody, and I'm going to spend the rest of the time talking about the NAR summit, so I'm going to be very tactical, is 4 million American families will move this year. 4 million American families will move this year. And if you look over a 50-year period, the low is 4 million, the high is 7 million. Residential moves are human condition. It's a mathematical formula between household formation, supply, demand, and cost of capital, right? So if you look, 2006, we sold 7 million homes. 2021, we sold 7 million homes. Interest rates were low, plenty of supply. Last year, 09, 1995, low. The good news is that residential real estate stores human beings, and it is an essential service, right? It's not like stock bonds, income producing property that when the world ends, like they could sit vacant for 5-10 years. So what I invite everybody to do is remember that disproportionately Americans choose representation, right? What's going on is coming to the buy side, I'm gonna share a sentence that I think through this, is what's happened on the listing side will not come to the buy side, meaning that sellers can sell for sale by owner right now. They don't have to pay a listing agent or a buyer's agent. They can do that on Zillow. A person on my street listed a house for 1.2 and sold it super quick. They'd use an agent that would probably got 1.8 because it was a teardown in the size lot they have. And when you look at the data, disproportionately, for sale by owners get about 8-9% less than if they'd gone through an agent. Zillow put out a seller report for 2022 that said 36% of sellers start wanting FSBO, end up with only 11%, meaning 89% chose an agent. So I'm of the belief that a disproportionate amount of buyers will still want representation. And so with that, I'll get over to the presentation. How are we doing on time? Because I want to leave time for Q&A.
You're doing good on time. Leo, a little bit closer to.
Okay. Ooh. All right, I just got to be able to read. I'm going to come hang out here. Is that cool? All right, so the NAR settlement. The highlights is that 1 million agents were released completely. The only ones not released were the Berkshire Hathaway family companies. They're going all the way from what both sides are saying. Any officers that participated inside of NAR activities are completely released. So if you're an EXP agent, you're released as an individual. We are still litigating. We have a game plan. I'm very confident in it. But just so you guys know, you don't have personal liability. That was one of the results of the NAR settlement. The practices I'm going to talk about get implemented mid-July. That's the most important thing that you need to think about. Is there a clicker? Or cool. So what does the settlement mean and what changes? So we all grew up and practiced in a format where by participating in the MLS, there was a unilateral offer of compensation. So whatever that box said, 2%, 3%, 2.5%, 1.5% was promised to you by entering into the agreement with the MLS. And a couple times in my career, I actually took somebody to arbitration if they didn't pay it inside of the association. So that was protected. It was one of the rules of engagement. That field is being deleted. It's no longer going to exist. Coincidentally, NAR told all the MLSs to build a field called seller concessions about 6 months ago, so maybe they were planning on settling. But the distinction is that it's not promised. It's an advertisement. So think of this no different than a roof credit, HVAC credit. So on a $500,000 house, you can now see an advertisement for a $15,000 credit. Do the math. But if you do not put it into the contract, they do not owe it to you, and there's no way for you to go collect it. Everybody understands it's a big distinction. The other really big rule change is you now have to have a buyer representation agreement signed prior to showing the property. And it has to state what you were being paid to represent that party. So, for example, if you agree to 2.5% of purchase price and that same property's advertising the $15K of 3%, you are not able to collect the difference between the 2.5 and 3. Does that make sense? That is the most critical part. All my little funny stories, remember this one. That's the most critical part. And when March 15th, we all found out, I was actually spearfishing the Keys with 3 agents. I was like, oh, this can't be good. And I spent the whole weekend on the phone with lawyers. I actually spoke to one of them who helped negotiate the settlement. And over the weekend, actually, I was on the phone with Glenn. And if you notice, a lot of executives didn't want to talk about it. I said, I have to go live on Monday, and I have to explain as much of this as I can. And Glenn Sanford said, say whatever you want. Because our fear as executives is that we'll have to write a bigger check. But he said, our people need to know that we have their back. So I went live. We had 50,000 concurrent viewers at the peak. And I know I'm not that interesting. I just know that a lot of us don't know what's going on, and we needed as much information as possible. So this is what came out of it, and we're operationalizing it across the country. So make sure that agreement is signed. And while I was preparing for the chat, I asked the lawyers, I said, okay, if I'm an agent, can I write that you guarantee me a 5K retainer and whatever I negotiate above that is mine? Nope. Cannot be variable. So whatever I negotiate is what I'm owed. I said, okay, let me ask you a different question. If I ask for 3 and they agree to 3, and at settlement, I can't get the seller to pay the difference. Can I lower it to 2.5 or 2? You may come down, but you may not go up. And also remember, none of us know how this is actually going to work. We're going to figure this all out together. When people ask me, and again, I'm speaking about this on Inman in a couple of weeks with Sherry Chris and DeWiggins. Oh,
Just keep it up.
sorry. Can I switch to the left?
Yeah.
I just need to see the screen. Here, let's. I appreciate you letting me know. Is that better? Yeah. Y'all need to speak up earlier. I'm sorry. Okay. So, where was I?
3%.
3%. So, down, not up. Okay. So where I was going to go with that is the panel I'm speaking on in a couple of weeks. It says, what will the future look like? And 2 years out, I'm super confident what it's going to look like. It's going to be the new normal. We are going to have an operating way of doing things that seems completely normal, and we will have actually forgotten about this whole mess. Because it's happened a bunch of times since I've been in the industry. Right? TRID was a huge deal. You guys remember AmeriDream, where we used to do down payment contributions? There's been so many things in this business that I'm like, the world ends next July. And it doesn't. So what I am predicting is that we're going to experience a messy middle. So July 15th, people are going to lose their minds in varying degrees. Some people aren't going to notice. Some people are going to act. I promise you, and I want you to laugh, because it's not going to be funny, but because you're going to remember. But there's going to be a closing sometime in August where the person's going to go, where's my commission? And there was no buyer's UGC agreement. I 100% promise you that. Because the other thing, when they make rules like this, my first question is, I got some details. Like, who's going to enforce this? How are we going to enforce this? Are we actually going to sue buyers? Like, I have a lot of questions. So what I think is going to happen is we're going to go through what I'm going to call the messy middle. And there's going to be people that try flat fee and hourly and continue to do percentages. And I clearly say, do what you want. As long as it's legal and ethical, my clause, I will support it. But what I think is going to happen is what we see in any industry shift of most big shifts is that like 118 people come out of the woodwork and say, I'm the next brilliant inventor. And then in 2 or 3 years, we'll have 3 or 4 different ways of doing things that scale. And that's what I think is going to happen. What I promise you is that it's going to be confusing and messy in the beginning. Let me get the clicker. Or maybe I just go in the middle. So make sure I've covered everything. So you can ask the seller to pay everything in your agreement. Are we clear about that?
Yes.
They don't have to. Think of this as sales price, closing date, purchase price, like all of the normal negotiating things, right? So if like the property's listed for $500,000 and you lowball it to $350,000, which by the way I did all the time, and 1 out of 100 times I bought a property for real cheap. They don't have to pay anything else, right? So just think of it as a true part of the negotiation process going forward. So, taking care of the buyer, making sure you guys have all your paperwork up front. I would encourage you guys to get as educated on this as possible because there's a ton of misinformation out there, right? CNN, and I actually do it for fun. Like at breakfast today, I asked the server if she heard, and she's like, yeah, there's no more 6% commission. That's literally what she said. I said, well, there was never. But so it's your job to educate, because if you educate, you attract. And if you're confident, it makes a big difference if you know all the facts. So, especially in this messy middle, when you're pulling comps, make sure you understand if there's a commission paid in the previous 6 months. Right? Was there a 3 or 2.5 or whatever offer? Because you'll have to make an adjustment for that. Fannie and Freddie have already come out and said they're going to treat it as not part of the seller contribution. I've had a conversation with the deputy director of the VA. He said, I can't tell you what we're going to do, but I think you can guess. But they actually have to draft law and amend it. So he promised he's going to text me the day it gets announced and go live with me and explain it to you guys. But I fully expect that the lending community will just treat the guidelines exactly like they are, right? Seller contributed commission should not be part of the buyer concession from an underwriting standpoint. You will have to word it that way in the contract, which is confusing, but we don't want to treat it that way.
Do you know if the history of the compensation is gonna stay in the MLS so that we can refer back to that?
Because I know how MLS data works, yes, the answer is
Okay.
yes.
Okay.
Even if fields get added or omitted, you can see the advertised.
Perfect, thank you.
So you need to educate the sellers, right? Because if you say, hey, you don't, this isn't included, but historically this is how it's done, and prepare them for the ask. Because if everything in life is expectations, right? One of my favorite scripts we taught on my team was with first-time homebuyers. I said, the week of closing, I promise you, you're gonna get a call from the lender asking for something asinine. Like a blood sample or a lease of your college roommate, something insane. And by the way, you're gonna be in a super important meeting, and it's gonna piss you off, but then you're gonna laugh out loud and say, Dios Nostradamus, and text me, you're the man. Right, how many times does that happen to you? Do you know for a fact it's gonna happen to you 70, 80% of the time? So, set expectations properly. I'm gonna hop around a little bit here, because there's, I spoke in Detroit last week, and Austin Chevron made me a t-shirt that I left, but I was gonna actually rock it. Treat your buyers like you treat your sellers. That's the mantra you need to do going forward. The people who are most concerned and scared, it's because you don't have context to anchor it to. We have been operating with sellers like this for decades, and every transaction you've ever done representing a seller is how you need to think for buyers. Can you imagine listing a house without a listing agreement in the MLS? Well, you can't because they made the rules that way. But like, imagine how the hell would you do that? Like, right? How many of you have gone to a listing appointment where you were not competing with other agents? Right? Assume every listing presentation is a multiple agent competitive pitch. Because that's what it's been for, I don't know, since 12, right? Low inventory. And you show up with a presentation that articulates your services for your cost, right? I will do X for Y. I'll stick a sign in the ground, you'll get a lockbox, high definition photos, drone, full-on movie if you pay me enough, right? Or I'll do it for a flat fee, done for yourself. Completely both okay. They both coexisted for decades, right? There is a value you will deliver for a fee you will accept. And we're all really good at it. So what I'm inviting you to do is to put your listing agent hat on and approach buyer transactions. So for most of us, you have muscles and scripts you haven't used in a long time, if ever. So what I would be doing for right now, until it goes into effect, is calling every buyer you put in a home in the last couple of years. So pick up your phone call and say, what did you like about the buyer transaction? Like, what did I do that stood out? And when they say a bunch of nice things, do you mind going on Google right now and saying those words? Because you need to have a digital footprint with someone reinforcing the value proposition you're now selling. And if I quizzed, I know some of you very personally, you know your days on market, your list to price sell ratio, you know, how much above list you normally get. But do you guys all know that for your buyers? I honestly didn't. Right, like, right now, right in the last 55% of transactions had a seller concession last 6 months. So I can guess that 55% of you get seller concessions on transactions. You need to get, like, what if you get 70%? What if you get 90%? What if you get, average 97% of list to sell ratio because you're aggressively representing the buyer? If you can demonstrate that you consistently get 5, 6, 7% below list, and you ask for 2.5%, 3%, is that a hard conversation? Right, so you need to know your own numbers going into this new world. As that weekend was progressing, and I was getting massive anxiety to go live, I thought I was going to talk to like 2,000 of you. It's a good thing I closed the YouTube window and I didn't realize I was talking to 50,000 people. Jack Miller called me the next day. He goes, Leo, I think you garnered the single largest captive audience of organized real estate ever. No, I'm glad I didn't know that the day before. But you guys need to be able to articulate that. And one of the things that gave me paralyzing tears, an 8-page exclusive buyer agency consultation in the driveway before we walk into the house. Right, so last Friday, we launched a 1-page single property buyer representation agreement. So if you're with EXP, it's in SkySlope right now. Use it, tell me if people curse us out, give me suggestions, I'm all ears. And I wrote it in English. It's not in legalese. I actually read it a couple times. I'm like, is this legally enforceable? We're like, we'll find out. But it's remember, none of us know what's about to happen. This is everyone's first kid which came home from the hospital right now. So the concept is cold lead, sign, internet, whatever. You want to see this one house. This is a first date, non-committal. But if it goes well, I would like to go to Starbucks or my office and go through my full presentation as that fair. Right, so I want to give you the tools in order to hopefully get to exclusive buyer representation. Yes, sir.
Hi, sorry, also Hawaii, and in Hawaii, we're just told not to use the one-page thing.
By who? My people or your state?
The broker.
Okay, then listen to your broker. We have 50 states.
And something about it has to comply with something.
Yeah.
Right.
So I shoot and they're correct, shoot and they're correct. So I'll figure it out, but do whatever the broker that works for you said. Let's see, there's a couple more because I think I only have. Oh, so here's the actual wording that you should put in the contract. Seller to credit buyer. Exact dollar amount. Don't do percentages. We're done with percentages. You're asking for exact dollars on this transaction. Your buyer agency agreement can say 3%, but whatever you land on because you're negotiating, put it right in there. Seller to credit buyer X dollars at close of escrow to satisfy buyer's contractual agreement with buyer broker. Questions? Super straightforward.
Why specifically on the percentage, not dollars? Or dollar percentage?
Because we don't want any ambiguity going forward. So your buyer representation agreement can be percentages, but when you're negotiating the purchase contract, let's not have any confusion whatsoever. And again, that's what we think right now. The cool thing about having 87,000 agents that did 355,000 transactions last year is I have the biggest feedback loop that exists, right? We sell more homes than any other company on the planet. So the more you guys try this and tell me what people are saying, if I need to add language, subtract language, be state compliant in Hawaii, I will do that. Let's see what else. So again, just be super well versed in it. Price it the way you would have, but just make, so if the seller says, hey, we're not offering anything, I would show them comps of the net execution price outside of concessions or commissions paid. Right? It's your job to guide them and show them what the net value of that house is. I think that covers all the big stuff. So please, please, please read any emails that come from me. I promise it's not junk. That's the bane of my existence. People are like, you know, it'd be really cool if we did this. I'm like, I did that shit 2 years ago. I text you, I emailed you, I sent it a work list. So please, please, please read all the communications from us and Ryan McLaughlin and NAR. I'm talking to just about every big association CEO in the country because we're just trying to be able to support you and the customers we serve. I had a hand here and a hand there.
Are there any plans to have a net sheet that a buyer's agent can present to the seller that would be a separate net sheet outside of the contract?
So most associations provide that in their form library. I haven't thought of providing a national mode, but that's an easy one.
I'm thinking about at the end of the transaction, when you put in bright the seller's concession, are they going to be like two separate seller's concession, one for the seller's credit to buyers?
So I'll repeat the question.
That's a good question.
Is the MLS going to break out seller concessions or true seller concessions or commissions? The answer is I don't know. But I'm sure, because
It would be really helpful.
we belong to 603 MLSs. Hold on the subject about the debate of my existence. But I'm assuming some will do it some way, and so Bright will come out with a way, and that's a very easy question to ask Bright and figure out how to do it. Yes, sir.
It's my understanding currently or previously that Realtor commissions could not interfere with the contract negotiations for the purchase. So if
Fantastic question. Yeah, so the question was, I understood that commissions cannot interfere with the negotiation. Yes, because that's how unilateral offer compensation worked. You took a listing, by belonging to that MLS and participating in the rules of that MLS, we said, whatever it is. Like if someone said, I'm not paying you, your job, if you called me and I was your broker, I said, just close the deal. And the day after closing, I'll call the association, we'll go to arbitration, I guarantee you we're getting 100% of the money. And the 2 times I did it, we got all the money. So going forward, the rule wants negotiation of the commission to be part of the transaction. So you are not allowed to earn a penny on that transaction if you do not execute the buyer representation agreement. So the way I'm internalizing the question is, if you get it signed up front, however you're supposed to collect that, it does not interfere with the transaction, right? If it's open to interpretation in the middle of the transaction, it would probably interfere. But that's why. Oh, and by the way, one of the very specific rules says if the words come out of your mouth, my service is free, don't worry about it, I include it like a lot of us either said or insinuated. You are not allowed to earn a penny from any part of the transaction. It's actually in black and white, 190 pages. Now, I don't know if you guys saw it yesterday, 2 days ago, the judge gave approval for the settlement. So this is happening.
Okay, we got 14 minutes left. Okay, Lee, if you want to go back on the stage, let's do some final Q&A. I'll do my best to run around. Some of you had questions before Leo even came into the room, and you thought I forgot, didn't you? You thought I forgot. So, question was specific to EXP, is whether or not the cap was changing, if you have any information on that.
No. Who's changing caps? No one's going to change caps. We are not changing caps.
Yay.
Yes, okay. It was a simpler answer than I thought it would be. The NAR settlement was the big one. Who else has a question? There was a question about revenue share. Was that going to change?
We have some fun news coming. That's all I'm telling you.
TBD. Okay, we're staying with short answers. No, TBD. We're looking for a yes for the next question. Okay, I'm going to run around. We have time for 3 questions. You had your hand up, you and you. Okay.
Okay, so I understand with the buyer broker agreement, like always the best practice to have that in place first, now it's required. My question is, you're putting out a random percentage and or random flat fee or charging by hour or whatever it is. But the line that you just put up about the sellers providing credit doesn't state that the difference is going to be paid by the buyer. Like, we can't go up, we can go down. But in the event that we're at 3% with the buyer and the seller's offering 2.5%, they have to understand that on that particular property, they're going to pay a 0.5% difference on the buyer's side. So how does that work?
Yeah, no, the buyer representation agreement says they owe you all of it. So anything you negotiate for the seller is a bonus, but in black and white, they owe you the full whatever you agree to, flat fee, hourly, or percentage.
There was also a discrepancy in the agreement if it was 2.5 apples, but they're offering 3 that you couldn't get the extra?
Correct.
That's right.
100%. No discrepancy.
I'm about to grab right. Yep. Hey Lou, I'm so happy you are our new CEO. For having a Latino, I'm so excited. I've known you since Virginia Beach. But hey, really quick on this, what about NAR? Do we have to stay with it? I know that's
a good question.
Yeah.
That was probably the most requested question over that weekend with a bunch of expletives behind it. So I'm very pragmatic and not emotional about most things in life. NAR, and I've said this on camera and I don't care if I'm being recorded, is a tool. It is a tool that provides you guys access to the MLS. Somebody left. I didn't mean it that way. It's a utility. It's a utility. That was pretty funny. You need association membership to have access to the MLS. It's an all or none rule. As your broker, if I join Bright and you are affiliated with me, you all have to join. It's an all or none rule. That's 50%. The other 50% is the forms. And by the way, it's the local associations that do God's work and who I have the closest relationships to. And NAR is different. The ones like Brian and I are cool. I like the local associations. They provide these forms, right? How many of you are licensed in DC, Maryland, Virginia? Are the forms slightly different when we cross these imaginary lines? So, there is no format that I'm aware of where any broker can afford to keep up with the contract creation across state lines. It's just, this market is the best example. Right? How many pages is Montgomery up to now? Like 56? Last time I stopped selling was, right, like, yeah, addenda for where the planes fly over. Yeah, I can't afford, anyone can't afford to keep track of that at scale. So, as long as I need forms, and they provide those for me for a nominal fee annually. Have any of you bought commercial real estate? Raise your hands. What did it cost you to get that purchase contract prepared by a lawyer?
I have a lawyer.
For me, it was like $3,000 to $5,000 every single time, and then for some other lawyer to review it a couple times, we were like $10K in legal fees to just review agreements.
I use the NVAR form.
Because you're a member.
That's right.
So if you leave NAR, by default, you have to leave NVAR, which means you can't use their forms.
That's right. And it saved me.
So the only two states that allow you to be a non-member and purchase agreements are California and Colorado. And the annual subscription to CAR is $1,500, and the annual subscription to be a non-dues paying member and buy the forms is $1,500. So when CEOs say, we're leaving NAR, there's a little asterisk that says when applicable. I'm just not gonna bullshit you. Like we need to belong if you want to participate in the marketplace and use the forms. So until that's not intertwined, then it's like leave whenever you want. You guys can actually leave tomorrow, join our commercial company and do residential real estate, but hire a lawyer to fill out the contracts and use Zillow, right? So do you, like I'm not emotional about it.
Okay, Leo.
So are you saying if you are a member of the MLS and the MLS is a member of NAR, then you're a member of NAR, is that correct?
That is by definition what happens.
Okay.
Because most 90-some% of MLS, Bright MLS is owned by 29 associations, I think last time I counted. When they buy more MLSs, but the ownership, like NVR is a shareholder of Bright MLS, the entity.
Okay, next.
So the DOJ has signaled that they're not quite done with NAR and that maybe the settlement doesn't go far enough. There's been talk that they want to make it so that sellers, it will be illegal for sellers to pay a buyer's agent commission. From everybody that you're talking to in the industry, do you think that they're going to continue to push further, which would be definitely
different? Yeah. So the DOJ has signaled several interesting things, right? One is clear cooperation and compensation altogether. It would affect exclusives. It would affect a bunch of things. The answer is, I never get emotional, just go back to pragmatism, right? Give me the rules of engagement, and then you can make a decision if you stay in this noble profession and help people, or you choose that it's no longer worth your time. So I have heard that the DOJ understands that if they push too hard, they break the most important part of the economy. No joke. Like, we are the biggest chunk of the GDP. Everybody understand that? Like, every time you guys help a family, like 60 vendors eat, we stimulate the economy by far bigger than any other segment on the planet. Like, yes, let's clap it up for that. So I've heard that the DOJ understands the words that just came out of my mouth. Do they? It's a good question. Because apparently the whole thing is because they think this is going to drive down the price of homes. So, yeah, we will see. I try not to lose sleep over stuff I can't control. Because I am clear of one thing. When this happens, it affects all of us. And in the most chaos in my career, I've had the greatest opportunities. Right? When there's 7 million transactions and rates are 2.85%, I am competing with your stupid nephew who just passed his test. Come July, I'm not competing with that idiot.
That's exactly right.
Next question.
Yes, hello, I'd like to ask, I'm here. I'd like to know what's gonna happen when we work with new construction and they offer a bonus.
That's a really good question. South Florida has new builds that pay up to 7% commissions. I have one group that specializes in flying all over the planet and building a pipeline of buyers, mostly in countries that have conflict, like Argentina and parts of Eastern Europe. And they sell out condos of people who want to get their money out of a destable economy. And they called me on Saturday morning and said, what do we do? And my answer to them is, make sure you have a clear understanding with the buyer and explain if we're gonna see new construction, I would, and again, the answer is we don't know because we haven't tested it, but what this group in Florida is telling me, they're gonna write it up with they're gonna know the inventory available, they're gonna have a good understanding of what's available in that market and start high and come down. But again, in practice, I have no clue what's gonna happen. I had a custom home builder call me last week who builds $10 million homes in Miami. And he said, I want to guarantee the 3%. I'm going to relinquish my MLS subscription, join our commercial company, and I'm gonna advertise on Zillow because I need the agents that sell my product, because he said it's a very small community, right? These people are connected at the private schools and the country clubs, and I'm going to personally go to all of them and say, I promise you the 3%, and he can do that, right? If you're not participating in NAR because the settlement's with NAR, you actually don't have to agree to any of this stuff.
For short answers, we have time for 2 more questions. One's here.
What happens if you are in a multiple offer situation, or you're going back and forth encountering? What happens to that verbiage that you said that the seller agrees to pay the commission? So is that changing?
Just repeat that.
Yeah. So the question is, if there's multiple offers, what happens with the language I recommended? Not required, recommended. It would be treated just like anything else, right? If you're asking the seller for a longer closing or using a loan or any part of the contract in a multiple offer situation could be used as an advantage or a disadvantage. My answer is, if there's a ton of multiple offers, that's probably part of the negotiation. And there's always the immediate bad interpretation, but think about the buyer who's going to choose to go out it alone because they read CNN's nonsense headline, and they lose 3, 4, 5 times. And then they go, okay, let me call a professional who actually knows what they're doing, because I'm tired of getting my heart broken every time we try to submit our offer by ourselves.
Okay, last one.
I have a question about sponsorship. Has EXP ever considered doing a 50% split?
Co-sponsorship?
Yeah.
Yes, I've considered it. It's actually, we'll talk offline.
One that, yes, offline. Yes, he's thought about it. EXP exclusives. How many of you right now have put at least one listing into EXP exclusives? Okay, that's not enough. Leo, tell them what this is, why they should be leveraged.
So EXP exclusives, I actually created it the day that NAR settlement was not dismissed and I knew it was going to trial. Because I didn't know what I didn't know. I've always, my job is to worry about stuff you guys don't even think is possible. What if 40% of the agents leave the industry and MLSs collapse because they can't afford to pay dues? I need enough technology to supply listings directly to portals. So EXP exclusives is technology that we have. I can do ad edit and go directly to portals if I need to. But the way it's designed right now is to have off-market properties, and the scripts and properties that I think about the most, if a landlord has a property with 11 months left on it and they can't stick it in the MLS, you can put it here and we can market it. If you have a price lock seller who is I'm not sure I want to list it because if I get an offer, I don't want to back out, my script would be, what's your make me move price? And let me see if I can get you a buyer. There's tons and tons of scenarios. I've had people list property November 1st and don't want them into the MLS till February 1st because they don't want the holidays. But if you bring me an offer that's acceptable, we'll wrap this up during the holidays. So clear cooperation and compensation allows you to have private exclusive listings by definition. They have to be in a closed network with a password, not publicly displayed, and you have to be intra-office. Where it's cool for us is we're not a 30-person franchise. We're the entire state, DC, Maryland, Virginia, all 50 states. So fastest adopted product we've ever launched, super powerful. I was speaking in Oakland 2 weeks ago, and an agent stood up and said, I have $246,000 of pending GCI from exclusives that don't exist in my market. So if you're with EXP, please download it. It's pretty cool.
And final, Leo, how about a final word to all of them as you're thinking through what their business looks like this year, next year? Where should their focus of discipline be?
So the first thing that I want you to do is to know your numbers, right? A lot of you are probably looking at 2022 to 2023 and go, I feel like I've lost. But if you look at the data, at the macro, if you're down 10%, the market was down 30% transaction, you actually grew by 20%. Right, like EXP went down in transaction count 22 to 23. We went from 3.8% of every transaction in America to 4.2. Right, we actually grew total market share of transactions. The moments like this clear out the week. Right now, winning is surviving. And you just have to, because I mean, I talk to agents all the time and it's like, I can feel it. It's like, is this worth it? Right, and I actually been saying this for a long time, like take your 1099 and divide it by 2,080, which is what the Department of Labor says is a full working year. If your hourly income is not where you could earn at a job, you should need to have an honest conversation with yourself and your family. Because you're probably, working nights and weekends and not being with them enough. And so you need to constantly make that decision, like, is this the business I want to be in? But I am also telling you, this too shall pass. Right now, you will get more market share. In July, we'll shake out a lot of people that should never have been in this industry.
Everybody give Leo a hand. Thank you, Leo.